Alright, this video was requested by a friend of mine who wanted to see this thing in action. This is just done using the Bash Bunny, which is this fun little piece of equipment here. So for this attack I'm hitting a Mac because people generally assume it's going to be harder to hit. Truth be told, it attacks Mac and Linux just about the same way. There's some slight variations in file name, and there's a slight change that needs to be done in how this device connects to the computer. But generally the attack process is the same. It goes in, it executes a bash script that creates a .conf, or I'm sorry, .config /sudo in the user's home folder. Once there, it puts in a file called sudo, makes it executable. It's actually just a Python script that wraps around sudo. It gives a very realistic looking password prompt. It grabs the password, it checks the password to see if it can really sudo with that password. If it can, it saves a copy of the password in that directory under a file called sudo.conf, I believe it is. It also will run the user's desired command. So they can't act, and it'll do it using the password over standard input, although I think it doesn't need that actually. Because it's doing that and it's silent otherwise, the user thinks their process is running. Even running Vim through this thing will work perfectly fine. Once the user's process is done, it'll then kick off a reverse shell, and this is using the sort of standard MSF Venom reverse Python HTTPS shell. So encrypted and through Python. The cool thing about this is because you have sudo active and because you have the sudo password, this program won't just kick off a shell, it'll actually kick off a shell using sudo, which gives the shell root powers. So essentially you have a root shell on the targeted system. Kind of scary when you think about it. And it seems to work pretty well. So the version I'm running here is a slightly older version. It has one minor bug in it that was making it not always generate a root shell the first time the user hit sudo. That has since been fixed, and once again it now does generate a root shell every time the user hits sudo. Basically just forgot to update the bunny before I ran this. But the latest version is up on the GitHub. It's on my GitHub. The Bash Bunny directory, and the branch is called Bushing Blue Turtle. So you can find that there. You will need to craft the Python interpreter payload yourself. That's pretty easy to do. I've left pretty explicit instructions. Now I will say that most antivirus does detect the reverse interpreter shell through Python as malware. It's not surprising, that's what you expect antivirus to do. So I also crafted a simple evader for it that seems to work pretty well. It gets it past Sophos. Sophos, in my experience, has been pretty decent. So this thing gets right past Sophos once you use the evader. The evader is called Shell Smuggler, if I remember correctly. It's very easy to use. You can essentially just pipe in the output from your MSF Venom, pipe it into Shell Smuggler. Shell Smuggler then pipes out to the payload, which in this case has to be called shell.py. Although it gets loaded onto the target system as .sudo in the same folder as all the other exploit material. This has worked very well. Like I said, I've hit both Linux and Macs with it. Gotten root shells several dozen times so far with it. Essentially, the only opening you really need is you need a user who does have sudo access and does sudo occasionally. You need that user to just be either not paying attention to their computer for about a minute, or takes a restroom break and leaves it unlocked. And this thing will get on there. It does not need any real sudo privileges to install itself because it's just modifying things in the user's path. So that's a little bit scary, and essentially just lies in wait for the user to hit sudo. Once the user tries to sudo something, again, grabs password, runs their command, and then before it exits, it just kicks off the reverse shell. So pretty effective. I've seen this thing work many times. Runs pretty well through Python 3, or I'm sorry, through Python 2. I think it also runs through Python 3, although I haven't tested it so thoroughly with Python 3 yet. But as I mentioned, it works on built-in Python 2 with both Mac and Linux, and yeah, I mean, disturbing number of root shells I end up getting with this thing. Occasionally even just accidentally when I sudoed something else. So with that, I will start the actual video of the exploitation process.
Okay, this is Michael Weinstein, and I am making this video to share at the request of Kevin, although a few others have asked to see this as well. So this is showing an exploit for the Bash Bunny that I am so far calling Bushing's Blue Turtle, named after Bushing if you happen to have known him. So obviously step one is putting the Bash Bunny into arming mode. I do that by plugging in over here. And I wait for that to come up on the Linux machine, which should be recording the action over here. Okay, that's coming up. And there we go. So I'm going to get a terminal. And I'm going to pull up the Bash Bunny to show you what's on there. So looking over the Bash Bunny, we have our usual folders, including payloads. And in this case, the payload is set under switch 1. This folder contains my other payload that I've been working on, but that's obviously not active right now. So at this point, we are going to cd into /media/Michael/ Bash Bunny. Go into payload / switch 1. And here we are now in the directory containing our payload. So at this point, one of the things I want to do is I need to make the reverse shell, but in order to make the reverse shell, I need to know what the IP address is of my machine. So let's ask it. And according to my machine, its IP address is, I always have to go through these things, 192.168.0.13. Conveniently enough, that was its IP address yesterday as well. So I should be able to use a stored command, which I'm going to just up arrow until I see. Alright, so first I'm going to show this thing getting nailed by the antivirus on the Mac. So I'm going to tee this off directly to shell.py, and I'm going to run the L port on 6666, and let's let it have a go. And we're just basically waiting, and there it goes. Alright, now that I have the shell active, or I guess it pretty much wrote the same thing that was there before, I am going to close out this terminal, and I am going to, if it will let me, eject the bunny. Alright, the bunny is ejected. Now I'm flipping back to switch position 1. And I'm going to plug in to this Mac laptop over here. And before I plug into this Mac laptop, I am going to start the screen capture. So it's capturing video. Microphone is off. Let's get this party started. Actually, I just realized that the USB is currently blocked by another device, so I'm just going to plug it into the hub. And wait for the fun to happen. There we go. So in this case, I don't actually want it to close. And something went a little bit weird. And if we look back at the script, we can see it was creating a bunch of .config/sudo. So oops. Hope if I typed that correctly. So we see it created two files here, but actually if we do ls tac-a, we can see the .sudo, and that's the one we're caring about right now. So I'm going to less.sudo, and we can see that this looks absolutely nothing like a Python reverse shell. And if we notice this text in particular, we can see that it was blocked. And this is the Sophos block page because, like you would expect antivirus to do, it doesn't like the idea of downloading a reverse HTTPS shell that much. Alright, so I'm going to kill this terminal session. And I'm going to unplug the Bash Bunny from the USB hub over here. I'm putting the Bash Bunny back in arming mode and plugging it over here. Of course, USB you always get wrong the first try. Should come up momentarily. There we go. Alright, got a command prompt back. Just pulling up old commands. Alright, now I'm going to do this with the evasion on. And the evader is a program called Shell Smuggler. And if you have a look at the Python code, you can kind of get an idea for how it's smuggling the shell, but it's essentially unzipping it and then rezipping it on the fly for the actual exploit. Again, I don't have to change anything because I'm on the same IP address locally that I was on yesterday. So it's going to do its thing for a moment. Shell Smuggler is going to do its thing, although Shell Smuggler's thing tends to be pretty quick. Alright. And we've got our payload. Now I'm going to exit out of here. I'm going to eject the bunny. I'm going to flip the bunny back into attack mode 1 and reach behind here. Bunny's plugged in to the USB hub again, and it'll start doing stuff momentarily. Meanwhile, I'm going to go to my terminal, and I'm going to kick off MSF console. So we see this is working properly now. Bunny's done its thing, so I'm going to reach back and unplug it while MSF console boots. MSF console's going, and since I already have the commands in there from testing, I'm just going to rerun those. So exploit multi-handler, payload Python interpreter reverse HTTPS, one of my personal favorites. Setting the L post and the L port, and the magic term RUN. And the reverse handler is up and running. Now we notice nothing especially interesting happened on this Mac so far. However, I'm going to sudo a command. In this case, it's just going to be a pretty useless command. Sudo echoing something. It's going to ask for my password. Which I entered the wrong one, but what's cool about this script is it actually checks the sudo password to make sure it's valid before it goes ahead. Now I'm going to enter the right one. We echoed something. Try that one more time. So it doesn't always work on the first one. I think I actually figured out the reason why. And I figured out the reason why. I think this one has slightly older software on it, which I will deal with before I run the next one. But as we can see, we just had Meterpreter session 1 opened. So let's go interact with session 1. And let's pull up our file system. And right now we can see what's in here. I probably should go and clean up in here at some point, but not too worried about it right now. Alright, so Meterpreter's going. First thing I can do is, of course, always see where I am, and I'm in my home directory. Let's go into the exploit directory. And we can now see a sudo.conf file. Let's cat that. And we can see the password, although I can see my password. By the time this video goes up, you won't be seeing my password. But that is a valid password for me. Let's get a fresh line. And let's cd into root. And we can see here, let's make this a little bigger. Oh, look at that. It's the root folder from there. And let's make a little file on this to show that I really do have access to root. Successfully exit on the first attempt from Vim, which is always an achievement. And if we look back on the system, we have a new text file called owned. And let's see what it says. How about that? Alright, and just to be cool, I'm just going to delete that file. And we can see that that system was in fact owned.